This is the Darshan Talks podcast, regulatory guy, irregular podcast with host Darshan Kulkarni. You can find the show on Twitter at Darshan Talks or the show's website at darshantalks.com.
Hey everyone, welcome to Darshan Talks. I am your host, Darshan Kulkarni. It's my mission to help patients trust the products they depend on. I'm an attorney, I'm a pharmacist, and I advise companies with FDA-regulated products. So if you have an interest in FDA-regulated companies or their products, it's the podcast for you. So today's podcast is actually really exciting. I'm actually excited because we're going to be talking to someone who I've followed on Twitter for a long time, and I've actually connected very recently on LinkedIn. She is the person to talk to about compassionate use trials, to talk about investigational drugs, to talk about bespoke therapeutics, and conflicts of interest. And I have so many more questions to ask. So if you are in clinical research and you're trying to figure out what are the bioethics around this, what should we do? If you are in medical affairs and you're trying to go, we're trying to create a study, but this is an extremely rare disease population. If you are a CEO of a pharma company or a medical device company and you just want to do the right thing, this is the conversation you want to be listening in on. Our guest today is the assistant professor at the Division of Medical Ethics at NYU Grossman School of Medicine. She has an incredibly impressive background. She has a PhD from Columbia and an MPH from Columbia. And before I keep talking and lauding all of her goals, all of her achievements, ladies and gentlemen, Alison Bateman-House. Thank you, Alison, for coming on.
Thank you so much for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here. I look forward to wherever this conversation goes.
That's the direction, wherever it takes us. So we're pointing due north for right now. So we'll see how it takes us. So Alison, before we jumped on, well, first of all, do you prefer Alison or do you prefer Bateman-House, or how do you prefer?
Alison's fine. Go ahead. Okay.
Alison. So Alison, you mentioned that you actually help companies figure out, like you basically help companies with a variety of different issues. And what I have struggled with always is, how do they even find you? How do they know that, you know what, I need to talk to Alison because she's the person, the guru on this stuff?
Well, I mean, so that's an interesting topic, right? I never set out to be a resource for companies. I'm an academic. I set out to do academic things, but I've always been very interested in having a real life policy impact. I never wanted to publish in top tier journals that only got read by people in my very small field of medical ethics, and all my time and energy coming up with great ideas, essentially didn't really move the needle in any significant way. So I deliberately started reaching out to speak to audiences other than my own audience. So, would see something in the newspaper that presented access to investigational drugs incorrectly, and would reach out to the journalist and say, hey, I just want to let you know that what you said is not accurate, and here's what I would suggest saying next time. Never in a confrontational way, but just sort of like, we need to raise the bar of education in this area. And just sort of one thing led to another. So, one CEO would contact me, and then you'd get a call from another CEO who was like, hey, my buddy over at such and such company suggested you. And I'd really say I spend about 50% of my time now doing pro bono advising, not only of companies. I do it for the FDA. I do it for patient advocacy groups. I do it for other non-governmental organizations, Médecins Sans Frontières, et cetera. So it really has sort of taken on a life of its own. And whereas my calendar does not like the time that I spend on this, because, I still have to do all those things that academics do, it is actually quite satisfactory for me at the end of the day to know I'm actually having real impact on people.
So you talk about having this impact on people, and you talked about reaching out to journalists. How did they take your initial reach out? Did they go, oh, this is great, someone's correcting me? Or did they generally sort of take a step back and go, wait a second, I know what I'm talking about, I'm the expert here?
No, I don't think anyone. I think very few people are willing to say that they're the expert in this area. I mean, it's a complicated, there's regulatory law stuff, there's a difference between state and federal policies sometimes, especially when you're doing things internationally. Then there's the ethics piece. I have had one or two people, just not respond, which is fair enough, but I've never had anyone be affronted, like, how dare you reach out to me? Because typically, I'll give you an example. I just reached out to a metastatic breast cancer group the other day because I just happened to see on Twitter their newsletter had an article on expanded access. I read it, and what it said about expanded access was wrong. So I reached out, behind the scenes and said, look, I spend my entire life working in this area. I just wanted to let you know your article was incorrect, and I know you're trying to educate people. So can I help you educate yourself so that you can spread correct information, not misinformation? And basically was just able to link the statements that I was saying right over to the FDA policies. So I think I come across as fairly knowledgeable, and I've never had anyone take offense. I'm sure there's always a first time. So now that you've introduced this idea into the universe, I'm sure from now on it'll be met with skepticism or scorn. But so far I've been very lucky.
It sounds like you're sort of doing the, have you heard of Harrow, Help a Reporter Out?
No, I'm not familiar with that.
It's basically was a website. I don't even know if it's live anymore, but it basically was a reporter puts out saying, I need some help with this concept, and people offer to help them out. You're just doing that in a real life version without the website and play. So,
well, a website would be much easier than me having to, scan numerous social media feeds and whatnot. But yeah, I think it's no one thing. Reporters tend to be generalists, even if they're not generalist. Say you have a health beat. That's enormous. Mm-hmm. So I think most people tend to be very receptive. And even when you talk to people in pharmaceutical companies, you might have someone who spent their entire life in pharma, but they've never worked with this particular patient population, or they've never dealt with this particular regulatory pathway or what have you. And they're generally quite amenable to having some guidance.
Which is very true. So let's get a little bit more specific. One of the areas you seem to get into, you inform me, is in conflicts of interest. And that's been, that's a super hot topic because people are always talking about, well, this is great that you're putting all this information out, especially during this time of COVID. But is your information itself unbiased? Can I trust your information? What is your take on that? Do you feel like, in general, we can trust the information that's coming out, and how do you parse the conflicts of interest that may actually show up? Does that question even make sense?
Yeah, I would have to say, in general, I trust nothing. I think there's deliberate misinformation. If you look in just your average social media or even mainstream media, there's quite frequently disinformation. But aside from that, because that's really outside of my scope of purview, there's just frequently a lot of confusion, and also everyone's biased. I'm biased, you're biased. We can disclose our biases and try to say, here's where I'm coming from, and so take what I'm saying through the acknowledgement that this is the lens at which I'm looking at it. But none of us can be completely disinterested. So for example, I spend a lot of time talking about regulatory policy. I happen to think the FDA is a really great institution. I happen to think that its consumer protection and public health missions are important. I certainly think that there are ways that the FDA could be improved, but people should know that I'm coming at it with the lens that, in general, this is a good institution. That being said, I'm not offering up opinion. I'm offering up, analysis or fact checking or what have you. And I think I normally can, show the receipts of where I'm coming from or why I say what I'm saying. So hopefully that is helpful. With regard to conflict of interest, for many, many, many years, the attention was spent on clinician conflict of interest. If you take a slice of pizza from a drug company vendor, does that suddenly influence your prescribing habits? And as much as clinicians like to say, no, I can't be bought for a pen, or I can't be bought for a slice of pizza, empirically we know it does affect prescribing habits. So that's just something that is there. But I'm not actually so interested in the clinician part of conflict of interest. There are a lot of people doing really good work on that. I'm really interested in patient advocacy related conflicts of interest. So we know many patient advocacy groups accept money from the biopharma industry. It's probably one of their major sources of funding. Not all patient advocacy organizations do it, and many of them have policies in place where, that can't be their sole source of funding, or that can't be their primary source of funding, and it all has to be disclosed. There's some places that have really good sort of conflict of interest management policies. There are also many patient advocacy organizations that have nothing like that. And if you keep in mind that the average patient advocacy organization is not like, the American Cancer Association or whatever, this huge thing, but it's a mom and pop thing that somebody started because they or a family member were affected by a disease. It's not a surprise that they don't have these very professionalized policies, but I just think since they do serve a role for their patient community, both in education, in helping to push policies, et cetera, it's really important to acknowledge the potential for conflict of interest in what they're doing. So I've spent quite a bit of time informally and formally on this topic of patient advocacy specific conflict of interest, particularly with regard to the funding they accept, the research that they fund, sort of the challenges they take on in terms of, increasingly we have patient advocacy companies that invest in drug companies. So suddenly they're majority shareholder in a company, at which point then it's a question of, well, are we trying to sell this drug for as much money as we can, because that way we get more money back into, funding our other really good, important initiatives? Or is this a situation where, as a patient advocacy organization, I'm actually concerned about how much money people have to pay for this drug because the people buying it are my constituents? So it's a very complicated area.
So I have several questions that popped out of it because, as you said, it's a very complicated area. The first question I want to ask is, and I recognize you spoke about it primarily in the context of HCPs, of healthcare practitioners, but the issue still arises. Can a conflict of interest be, quote unquote, removed or addressed because you have transparency? Because people seem to always go, well, there's a conflict, let me just disclose it, and we're fine now. What is your take on it? Let's first start with what is your take on it?
I don't think disclosure is ever sufficient. I think disclosure is a good first step because it lets people see the cards that you bring to the table. But I really think you also then need to have policies of, well, when it comes to this decision, X person will recuse themselves from it, or, we're going to have this, stakeholder committee of people who are not in our patient advocacy organization who, when something comes up, we actually bring them in and get their independent assessment of this. I think there are numerous ways that you can work around it, but no, I don't think disclosure is sufficient. But it is a good first step. But let me just say, I think that disclosure needs to be meaningful disclosure. So putting it in a report that nobody knows how to read and nobody knows how to find is not meaningful disclosure. Putting it right there on your website is. So.
Okay, but let me challenge you a little bit on that. If you're a smaller, like you said, a mom and pop patient advocacy, you don't know what you're doing right or you're doing wrong, and you can't organize these larger sort of subgroups who can help you address these conflicts. What do you recommend these types of groups do if they have a potential conflict? For example, they're treating a rare disease state. I'm making this up. Say Huntington's, for example. I have no idea if you work with Huntington's disease or not, but let's say there's a patient advocacy group works with Huntington's, and they have a conflict. It's a mom and pop shop, and they disclose it, and now someone calls them out on it and goes, well, you're getting funding from pharma. Well, they're the only ones who are willing to fund me right now.
Right. So normally when a patient advocacy organization, a very small one, is in that situation, not normally, but in some cases they end up calling me. And I do not suggest that as the, the first step, because I'm only one of me and this is not a sustainable solution. But what I normally end up doing in those situations is introducing them to a patient advocacy organization that has been around longer and has navigated these waters and come up with policies that I think are effective. And it's really sort of like a mentoring program of, okay, tiny new organization X that needs help. Let me introduce you to still small, but slightly, more professionalized organization Y that navigated this 3 years ago. And let's see what they can do to help you move forward. And then I normally check back in at some point to say, were you able to get through whatever your issue was? Did you really boil it down to one concrete issue, or was it a whole suite of issues? And then what sort of policies did you put in place to navigate that? And, that's a completely informal thing, but it seems to work. So
which raises the next question, which is there a set of policies, a model set of policies, if you will, that patient advocacy groups should have that maybe guides them, as opposed to everyone trying to rediscover the wheel each time?
So this is where I have to disclose my conflict of interest. So I work with something called the National Health Council here in the United States, which actually has a set of best practices exactly for these issues. So I normally refer people there, and it's not because they pay me, because they don't, or anything like that. It's just I really think that they're a good set of policies. That being said, they are for the more professionalized, less mom and pop patient advocacy organization. But I still think, the policies are available on their website, and I still think they're a good first place for people who look at it and go, okay, well, I can't have an independent board of directors, but I can at least look through this and see what they suggest that I can do in terms of putting a disclosure on my website, in terms of saying, as an entity, we're going to make a policy that, we're not going to accept all of our funding from one entity, et cetera. Even if you have some rare disease and there's only one company out there that is interested in investing in your rare disease, there are other places where you can find money, either philanthropy or doing bake sales or what have you. You're very rarely in a situation where you have to have a 100% funding stream from one entity. So
that's really, really interesting. So you've got this situation. You talked about the National Health Council, and you talked about how they have certain ideas on what they recommend, and I assume you help them with that process.
Actually, no, they brought me in. They brought me in afterwards to vet and to say, you were not involved in this. You have freedom to tell us that it's terrible or to tell us what needs to be improved. And I actually thought that they were quite comprehensive. So, and it wasn't just me; they brought in other people too. So I have no vested interest in them. I just think that they're a really good policy. So. But they cannot work for the mom and pop. I mean, there are just certain things that they expect that a mom and pop can't. But I think the mom and pop can look at them and say, okay, out of these 30 standards, we can probably do 20 of these. And so we're going to commit to doing them.
So here's my question. If you are mom and pop and you are looking at only specific, if you're looking at the National Health Council, Here's a question actually I have from Lydia Green, by the way. I'm going to put the question up just so you can see it. Hi, Darshan. A group of us, ad writers and physicians, have a simple low-cost solution. Independent peer review of content at medical school facility, faculty specializing in that clinical area without conflicts of interest. What is your opinion? Do you think that works? What's your take on that in the context of reviewing conflicts of interest?
I mean, in this case, it sounds like when you're writing about topic X, you go out and find some investigators or physicians involved in topic X and asking them to review the content, and just making sure that it seems legit. I would say that's, obviously a very, very good way to go. It's sort of like independent peer review. The problem is, obviously the quality of that depends on who is doing the reviewing. And I would imagine it is sometimes difficult to find the right people in the mix, particularly if it's a not common issue. So I think this is great. It's a good way to go. I just think it would be somewhat difficult in some circumstances to make sure you're talking to the right people. And then, of course, the people that you reach out to have to be forthright in disclosing their conflicts of interest. So it's sort of like a system built on trust, which sometimes is the best you can do.
So I guess my big question that popped out for me as we were discussing it was the issue of what I refer to as Monday morning quarterbacking. And I full disclosure, I know nothing about football, so I assume Monday morning quarterbacking is relevant.
I know nothing about football either, so we could get into treacherous territory very quickly here with sports metaphors, but okay.
Okay, so you've got say 30 rules out there, and apparently Lydia is pointing out she just did this with Stanford and Harvard, so I assume they know what they're talking about with conflicts, or at least they're helpful.
Sure, but keep in mind that when you go to the higher tier medical institutions, you're also more likely to get the people who are involved in trials or in writing policy guidelines or what have you. So it's all the more important to press for those, disclosure of pre-existing biases. It's a catch-22, and actually pharmaceutical companies deal with this all the time. They want to bring in an independent, knowledge leader, a content area expert. But often those are the people who were involved in consulting with, other pharmaceutical companies or the FDA or something. So, you identify who the experts are, but everyone else has also identified the experts. And so then you start getting into conflicts of interest. So, unfortunately, there's just nothing easy here.
So I keep trying to finish this thought, and it's just so interesting, and everyone has so many questions, obviously. But if you're dealing with Monday morning quarterbacking, you've got 30 different rules. You say, I'm going to use 20. Someone's going to call you out and go, look, you did 20, but you didn't look at the other 10. And those other 10, they're the most important. How do you handle, or how do you advise a small mom and pop sort of patient advocacy group who wants to do the right thing, is trying to do the right thing, but then gets social media pushback going, well, you're still biased, and you can tell because you didn't follow these additional 10.
So I think the most important thing for a patient advocacy organization in this situation is to be able to demonstrate that everything they do is in alignment with their ultimate mission. So what is their ultimate mission? Is their ultimate mission getting access to the widest number of patients? Is their ultimate mission, developing drugs for this condition? Is their ultimate mission in making sure that, services and respite care and what have you are available for people in this condition? If you can point to people and say, yes, we took an unrestricted gift from, large pharmaceutical company X, but we can show you that every single bit of it went to provide, educational resources that were, as unbiased as possible. We brought in independent experts to consult on it. We used it to provide those respite care grants or those, access to ventilators or whatever it is. I think in most cases, as long as you can show that what you have done is in alignment with your mission, you would diffuse criticism pretty quickly, even if they're like, look, you didn't follow to a letter this policy, because you're like, well, it's not my policy. It's a policy of other groups that don't face my particular challenges. In good faith, we've tried to follow what we can, but in places where we deviated, you can still see we're being mission driven.
So does that mean you recommend having maybe a bioethicist on the board of these groups as they're evolving, or is it too soon often to bring a bioethicist on?
I don't think as they're evolving. I mean, not on the board. Maybe you might want to give us a phone call and say, would you be willing either pro bono or for, minimum wage for a few hours to review things with us? But I don't think on the board. See, I'll be honest, reaching out to you, I was a little intimidated, and I was kind of going, well, why would she even talk to me? And if I was on a patient advocacy group, I would totally think of that. Like, she's important. She's working at NYU. She's leading all these teams. We didn't even talk about some of the other things you're doing, but reaching out to you and going, can you not just help me, but help me for free, would be a very big ask in my eyes. And what do you sort of tell those people going, I don't want to reach out to you because I don't want to waste your time because I'm after such a small project, if you will, for lack of a better term. If you don't ask, you don't get. So, ask, and the worst thing that will happen is someone will say no, or they won't answer your request. I think not only in bioethics, but in medicine, generally speaking, we are driven by the desire to help people. And particularly when it comes to the patient advocacy organization, we think that our missions are in alignment. They want to help people too. So if a pharmaceutical company reaches out to me and says, will you do something for free? I'm going to have a different answer than if it's a patient advocacy organization. And I imagine most people in this realm probably have that sort of bifurcated standard. So yeah, reach out. We're human. Most of us, I'll just say in bioethics, most of us got into this field because we saw things that concerned us in clinical care or research or what have you. And so we really are sort of driven by this mission to try to make things better. So I think we have aligning objectives. Just reach out to us.
So here's another question that I have wondered. I'm already going over the line, but I'm going to ask the question anyways, and you can let me know. Do you think it's important, over the line in terms of time, do you think it's important to have a diverse set of views when you're getting bioethical input, or is it people are generally using the same methodology and therefore you'll generally get the same answer?
So I don't think anyone's going to take time. If they're going to take time to reach out to a bioethicist, I don't think they're going to take time to reach out to 2 or 3. I think they're going to assume that one of us is sort of offering perhaps, just our perspective, but something that's not completely outside of the norm. Yeah. I would hope that most of us would be accountable enough to say, here's sort of the mainline view on this topic. I think diversity of viewpoints is essential, but I don't think that necessarily means that you necessarily need to talk to different bioethicists. I think you need to talk to the different stakeholders. So for example, when I work with pharmaceutical companies, I typically do not charge for my time. Instead, the price that I charge is that they have to, in addition to speaking with me, they have to speak with a relevant patient or patient advocate. And I actually think that that's actually a standard that is for their benefit. It's not for my benefit, it's for their benefit, because I can say, oh yes, I would definitely do X, Y, and Z. And then a patient can come in and say X, Y, and Z is terrible for these reasons. So, right. And I think a company would want to know that ahead of time before they're making their decision. And, there's a difference between talking to a patient and multiple patients. You're going to have a variety of perspectives, just like when you talk to clinicians. So I talked earlier about, there's sort of this expert cadre of clinicians who are frequently asked to consult on things. Their reality is completely different from the physician who perhaps is in a, public hospital, predominantly patients without insurance, perhaps patients who are unhoused or have other social needs, lack of food, et cetera. So I really think it's actually to the benefit of all parties to hear from a diversity of perspective on all things, not just the ethics of it, but, the pragmatics of it. Is this going to work? Is this what people want? What sort of problems do we foresee looming if we do this? So yeah, I think diversity of opinions is essential. Although, there's obviously a balance between how many people are we going to go talk to versus like when we actually need to get this thing done. So,
fair enough. So I can keep going, as you can tell, but do you mind if we ask a couple of rapid fire questions before we wrap up?
Okay. Go ahead.
What is an accomplishment you're most proud of?
I honestly think, and I don't think I'm bragging when I say this, I honestly think the work of my colleagues and I have changed access to investigational medicines, not only in the United States, but globally over the last probably 7 years. And I'm really, really, really proud of that. I think things are more transparent. I think they're fairer. I think they're much more routinized and rationalized than opposed to it being sort of an episodic of, sure, you can have something, but you can't. And, no, we're not going to give anyone anything for the next 3 years versus, well, now we've changed our mind. So I'm really proud of our work in that area.
Awesome. When are you most inspired?
Well, I have terrible insomnia, and normally my good ideas come when I am trying to sleep. And then it's a roaring of, I should get up and write this down before I forget it, versus if I get out of this bed, I'm never going to get back into it and actually get back to sleep. So yeah, most of my ideas come when I'm in bed, unfortunately.
I have never seen a pro-insomnia commercial like this before, but go insomnia.
Yeah. Now, I actually, if I have like a really thorny issue to work through and don't have much time, I'm actually just like, clear the calendar. I need to go take a nap because inevitably I will not be able to sleep, and I'll come up with a solution to it as I'm attempting to sleep. So it works for me. At the expense of my sleep hygiene. My sleep hygiene, is completely destroyed, but it seems to work for me on other issues.
Fair enough. What is the best compliment you've ever received?
I think that there are numerous patient advocates who see me as a patient advocate. And I take that as a compliment. I'm not a patient advocate. It's not that I'm opposed to patient advocacy. It's just I have a different role to play. But I think the fact that many patient advocates see me as one of them means that, sort of my stance is closely allied with theirs. And I take that as a compliment.
Who is your hero or heroine and why?
Well, this is going to be really insider baseball, and I don't know baseball either. But there is a bioethicist at Johns Hopkins University named Ruth Faden, who I was lucky enough to work for about 5 years when I was much younger. And she's just like totally my idol. Like Ruth Faden can do no wrong. And if anyone thinks I have anything to offer on anything, they're really selling themselves short. They should be talking to Ruth Faden. So Ruth Faden.
Is Ruth still working at Johns Hopkins?
Yes. She actually, she came to national attention, I guess in the 90s. There was a presidential advisory commission under Clinton looking at surreptitious radiation studies on humans. These people, they were prisoners, other people were used as research subjects for radiation studies, either without their knowledge or against their will. And this came to light in the 90s, and they impaneled a presidential advisory commission to figure out what to do about it. And there ended up being compensation and an apology and other such things. And she chaired that committee. And so, if anyone wants to find out about Ruth Faden, go look up the Advisory Committee for Human Radiation Experimentation and check out her work, because she really is amazing.
That's amazing. What is your favorite way to give back to your community?
What I do right now. I rarely say no to a request to speak to people, simply because I think I do have some specialized knowledge and I want to share it with as much people as possible. As I said, in addition to doing all the stuff I have to do to survive in academia, I speak with patient advocacy groups. I'll talk to like 3 people on a street corner if they convene. And it's because, I really think this is what I can give back the best through.
How do you define success?
Having things be better after I leave the scene than they were before I got there. And sometimes that is, like a major system shift. And sometimes that's just, is the language on this website clearer, or, is the policy more straightforward?
Okay. I'm going to ask one last question. If you were going to build a 2020 Mount Rushmore, who would be the first person on it and why? Ruth
Faden. I just told you why. I'd have Mount Ruth. Mount Ruth.
Just 3 different, 5 different pictures of Ruth or statues of Ruth?
Sounds good to me. I mean, like every city should have a statue of Ruth Faden.
That's awesome. I'm gonna see if I can tag her, because that is awesome.
She'll be mad at me. She'll say like, "Why are you saying all these crazy things?" But I just think she's smart and grounded and has really left the world a better place for being here, and that's really what I strive to do. So,
here's a question for you, as a guest, based on our discussion. What is one question you'd like the audience to answer for us in the comments?
Well, one thing that you said that I thought was a really interesting question is, how do people even find me? So I guess I'm interested, like, has anyone out there ever even thought of talking to an ethicist? And if you thought of talking to an ethicist, did you decide to do it? And if so, were you able to figure out how to do it? Or did you decide not to do it? And if so, why did you decide not to do that?
That's such an
because I actually think I actually think I'm very approachable. So, but then it's not like I'm, on Google, the little person on Google. You know how every day they showcase some other person. So I don't know how people find me, and I don't know how people find my colleagues, and I don't know who even thinks to talk to us. But I'd be curious to know that.
Fair enough. Well, you guys know where to find her and answer the question. Okay, so during this podcast, we landed up talking about how you actually land up helping companies, helping patient advocacy groups. You talk about how patient advocacy groups try to address issues and what issues they might fall into, what kind of conflicts of interest they may have. We talked about things like bioethicists on the board. We talked about transparency. We talked about the insufficiency of transparency, even though it's a good first step. We talked about funding the research. We didn't get into topics like censorship and the like, which I'd love to talk about with you, but that's a different discussion for another day. I'd love to talk about bias and deliberate misinformation. We touched on those topics, and there was so much there. But is there anything I missed, or you think we should add in there that I've mentioned?
No, but if you're going to give me a second, I'm going to put a plug out there for the one policy I would advocate above all others. Before my career ends, the one policy I hope to be able to push through is to stop direct-to-consumer advertising of pharmaceuticals the way it currently exists. I think it would be great to have, quote unquote, ads that were more patient education and less, drug X will make you dance, ecstatically through flowers. So that's the one thing I would love to put out there as something for people to be thinking about, because I think that's really just a terrible situation we're in now.
Oh, let's definitely have a conversation on that, because I actually think drug ads are fine, but I love your
No.
I want to be wrong.
I don't like them at all.
I'm excited to discuss it with you. Just to be clear, nothing in this podcast should be construed as legal or clinical advice of any kind. It is intended for educational and entertainment purposes only. For those of you who missed it, where can they reach you?
I'm on faculty at NYU Grossman School of Medicine, so you can just Google Alison Bateman-House, NYU, and my contact information should pop up.
Awesome.
And I'm on Twitter. Oh, and I forgot. There's this new thing out there called Clubhouse, and apparently I'm now on Clubhouse, and apparently we are now doing every Wednesday, I guess at 5 p.m. Eastern, a ethics hour. So it's open topic. So if someone wants some free ethics advice, hop into the ethics hour at 5 p.m. Eastern Clubhouse. It starts tomorrow for the first time, but we'll see how it goes. But that's another way to reach me.
I would love to do Clubhouse. My issue is I don't have an iPhone. And until they bring out the Android version, I'm just stuck listening to people telling me how great Clubhouse is. So
I haven't been involved in it at all. Like literally, I have no idea what I'm getting into. But apparently as of tomorrow, I'm talking ethics 1 hour a week, which I think will be great.
It's going to be exciting for sure. If you like this podcast, please leave a comment and subscribe. You can find me at Darshan Talks on Twitter, or go to our website at darshantalks.com. Alison, thank you so much for coming on. I appreciate you talking to me and the two other people at the corner about this topic. It's fascinating, and I have so many more questions to ask you. But till then, thank you again.
Well, thanks for the soapbox on the corner. I'll talk to you later.
This is the Darshan Talks podcast. Regulatory Guy, Irregular Podcast with host Darshan Kulkarni. You can find the show on Twitter at Darshan Talks, or the show's website at darshantalks.com.